Welcome back. Our political analyst now to put today's news into perspective. Democrat Harold Cook and Republican Brendan Steinhauser with us today. Former Governor Rick Perry, Energy Secretary. A lot of questions about qualifications over some of Trump's picks. What about Perry for Energy Secretary?
Back in the game, huh? Just about the time you think you've seen the last of Rick Perry, he comes back. Look, there have been so many ridiculous people mentioned as strong possibilities for cabinet-level jobs. It is to my vivid surprise that Rick Perry being named Energy Secretary is among the least disturbing picks that I have heard of for Trump's cabinet so far. And that's really not much of a reflection on Rick Perry as much as it is the other picks. Look, is he qualified? Sure. I mean, he led an energy state for years and years and decades and lifetimes and, as long as I've been alive. So, am I going to agree with him? Probably not. But then again, my candidate didn't win the election, so I don't expect for me to agree with cabinet-level secretaries on a whole bunch of stuff. The silver lining on this is that Rick Perry is capable of being a grown-up. He is capable of making rational decisions. Yes, he is a fan of fossil fuels, as is every governor of Texas, including the Democratic ones. But he's also got an open mind, at least toward renewables, wind and solar. I think I'm going to take an all is not lost attitude here. The bad news here is I actually think that he probably wanted Veterans Affairs, which is kind of ironic because energy is kind of arguably a bigger job. But I think he would have done better with Veterans Affairs because I think he would have sunk his teeth into it a lot better because it interests him. I hope he does well, I for all of our sakes.
Brendan, what's your take on this, just in what you've seen from Rick Perry in the past and moving forward in a Trump administration? Obviously, the two of them were bitter rivals at one point during all of this, but then he came to his side pretty quickly once he saw he was going to get the nomination.
Sure, yeah. Governor Perry was a vocal critic of Donald Trump, certainly in the campaign, and it's somewhat surprising that they've been able to make amends, but Perry did campaign for him leading up to the election. And look, is he qualified? I think absolutely. I mean, he was the governor of Texas for 14 years. He's spent a lot of time thinking about and being involved in policy on energy. I think this is a signal that the Trump administration and the Republicans in Congress are going to work together to have an all-of-the-above energy policy to explore domestic production, to support free market efforts to get things like solar and wind and geothermal and natural gas kind of on the market. So I think you'll see a pretty strong energy policy coming out of Congress and the White House and certainly in the department. The other thing too to consider is that the Energy Department also is where we have the nuclear weapons capabilities, nuclear non-proliferation, so making sure that rogue regimes like Iran or North Korea or others don't get their hands, or they do have their hands on nuclear weapons, preventing the spread of them in North Korea's sake. So you'll see some of that as well, but I do think this is more of a pick that reflects the focus of the Energy Department on energy production. You've heard Republicans talk for years about drilling and about exploration, about really not relying on foreign governments and OPEC to determine our energy future. And so I think that you're going to hear a lot of talk about being energy independent, and I think the choice of Rick Perry is a reflection of that.
Let's talk about the other Texan, Rex Tillerson, for Secretary of State, of course, the ExxonMobil CEO, but a lot of criticism about his ties to Russia and his qualifications. Surprised by this pick?
No, I've got a bit of a different take on that. I mean, yes, he's got close ties to Russia. I really kind of think he's in for a fight in the U.S. Senate for confirmation. And that's a good thing, whether or not he is ultimately confirmed or not, because there are many more questions about this man than answers, I believe. Look, a Secretary of State should have, I believe, good relationships with leaders around the world. That's a good thing, potentially, not a bad thing. It can be a bad thing depending on what you're using those relationships for and on whose behalf you're using them. I am not comfortable with how close he is to Putin and the Russians. But by golly, if he's going to use those good relationships to the benefit of the American people, then none of us should be concerned about it. Those are facts that we don't know yet, and hopefully they'll come out in confirmation. I don't think there's any question that he's a credible nominee for Secretary of State, but that's not really the real question. The real question is he conflicted out? Are his conflicts of interest through Exxon or other conflicts a disqualifying event for him? Or are they not? And that, I think, makes his confirmation process probably more important than the confirmation processes of most of these other cabinet secretaries.
Yeah, how do you see Tillerson's confirmation process playing out? I mean, we've heard from some of these Republican senators who are maybe not as on board, but we are also hearing that about some of this investigation with the CIA and the Russian hacking. So a lot on the table right now with Russia.
Right, I kind of feel like we're in the middle of Rocky IV again. It's in the 1980s and the Cold War is back. But there is a lot of truth to the fact that the Russians are a geopolitical threat in some ways, or certainly a rival. And so I think people are taking a look at the Russians, their actions in Crimea and in Ukraine, and saying these are people who want to expand their power, and so we have to be leery of them, and we have to be asking tough questions of anybody who will be our Secretary of State if they do have close ties to Russia. You're really seeing a public relations campaign from the Trump administration and from the critics like Senator John McCain and Senator Marco Rubio to try and position themselves on Tillerson. So you're seeing, for example, the Trump administration roll out support from folks like Bob Gates, who actually recommended Tillerson to Trump. Condi Rice has come out in support of Tillerson. Senator Mitch McConnell and other voices have. But on the other hand, you've got Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, Senator McCain and Rubio, and other critics of Russia and of Putin coming out saying that we need to ask some tough questions of him. So I think there will be a pretty tough fight in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Tillerson cannot lose more than, he really needs to have all the Republicans, I think, in the committee to go to the full Senate. But even there, if he does go to the full Senate, he can only lose a couple. And so I really think this will be a very tough fight. There are serious questions about his ties to Russia, and if he can answer those questions and satisfy those concerns, he'll be our next Secretary of State.
Long process ahead. It'll be interesting to watch, guys. We're out of time. Thank you very much. Coming up next on